Welcome to the first event in the Meg Quigley Summer Series, sponsored by Forests Music. I am Kristen Wolf-Jensen, founder and director of the Meg Quigley Vivaldi Competition, and along with my colleagues on the team, we are pleased to present the Quigley Summer Series that will offer once-weekly free sessions throughout the summer, featuring a variety of special topics relevant to our mission. Each session is hosted by a member of the MQVC team and includes a panel of guest artists with expertise on the topic at hand. A continuation of MQVC's commitment to audience engagement and community involvement in the arts, the summer series will serve bassoon students, avocational players, and professionals alike. If you would like to support our continued efforts in these areas and beyond, visit mqvc.org/donate to become a friend of MQVC. Today's session is titled Learning from Experience, a panel discussion with Bassoonists of Color. This session is the first in a series of ongoing actions undertaken by MQVC to demonstrate our commitment to diversity, not only through these sessions, but by continuing to undertake measurable actions toward inclusivity in the months and years to come. Those actions include reworking our mission statement to reflect a more nuanced concept of intersectionality with regard to race, gender, and other aspects of identity. We hope that today's conversation will serve to amplify the perspectives and lived experiences of our panelists to deliver a better representation of what it means to be a bassoonist in the 21st century. It's now my pleasure to introduce our host for this panel, Leah Uribe.
Thank you, Kristen. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you, and I'm just amazed by the numbers. We get 88 participants and 3 amazing panelists. So welcome all. This is such a great opportunity for us to connect. I have known of you and have known you for a while. So this has been a great, space for us to be in what I will call an affinity room for the 4 of us. Maybe we have things in common that we can speak of today and share with our attendees. So it's really, really exciting. I am Leah Uribe, bassoonist, professor at the University of Arkansas, and principal bassoonist of the Symphony of Northwest Arkansas, originally from Colombia, South America. So why don't we go ahead and start by introducing yourselves? I would love to hear where you're coming from, what do you do, your trajectory, anything else that you want to add to the conversation. Kika?
Oh, hi. My name is Kika Wright. My name is Francisca del Carmen Wright, and I go by Kika because it's a little easier. I'm Honduran American. I was born in Tegucigalpa, Honduras, and I was adopted. And I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I guess I did my undergrad and graduate degrees in state schools, for money reasons, obviously, but I definitely learned a lot of really good stuff. And then I did 2 diplomas, one with Nancy Goris at CMU and one at the Glenn Gould School with Mr. Murley when he was there. And then after I left Canada, I moved to Baltimore to be with my spouse, Adrian. And when I lived in Baltimore, I got hired to teach bassoon and oboe at the Duke Ellington School of the Arts, which is an arts high school that is actually pretty interesting, and I have not encountered it other places other than really big cities, but I was the dedicated bassoon and oboe teacher, and I would see my students 2 or 3 times a week for, a dedicated hour for oboe and bassoon lessons. And I also taught for an interim semester at Morgan State University, which is a historically black college in Baltimore, Maryland. In 2018, we moved to New York City, and I've been playing, I have been freelancing like we all do around, but I also teach for Bronx Arts Ensemble at 2 schools, a middle school and a high school up in the Bronx, and those kids are just extraordinary. Oh my God, I love them so much. And, I haven't seen them in a while because of the global pandemic. But I hope they're practicing. If you're watching, I hope that you are practicing, and I hope I see you soon. And I play in 2 chamber groups. One is called Incidental Chamber Players, and it is a group in Pittsburgh, and it incidentally became almost entirely minority group. So we only have, I'm not sure how that happened. And then I play in like a bi-coastal widowing quintet called the Deep Tones Ensemble, which actually we got put together at Sean's group with Seven Audio, which is like a chamber festival for young, I guess, wind players. But we stayed together now. It's been 2 years, a year and a half, 2 years, and so that they're also, it's like an entirely minority group. So that's what I've been doing.
Thank you, Kika. Garrett.
First and foremost, thank you so much for having me and inviting me here. It's really an honor to speak at this event. My name is Garrett Mcqueen. I like to start my journey all the way back into the band room, all the way when I was in 7th grade, because I think it speaks to the issue of access. I came from a family that couldn't necessarily pay for me to have any instrument, much less a bassoon, but because the brass instruments and the more expensive instruments are usually owned by the schools, that's the instrument I ended up with when I joined the band. And I think it's really important to always underscore the importance of those entry points. That band room was the entry point for me. And if it weren't for that school-owned instrument, who knows where I'd be. So I joined the band. Loved it so much that I decided I wanted to go to school to become a band director. Along the way, I found out that teaching middle school kids was not for me at all, and I never wanted to do that. So at the very end of my undergraduate career, I switched over to a performance degree and decided to pursue that. I studied bassoon there at the University of Memphis with Lacole in Washington. From there, I decided that I wanted to live in Los Angeles. I wasn't sure what was ahead of me in my life. My teacher, Lacole, told me to apply to the University of Southern California, so I did. And that's where I earned a master's degree in bassoon, where I studied with Judy Farmer, who I think I saw in the participant list. So hello, Judy. It's so great to talk to you, even though I can't see you. It's at USC where the trajectory of my career and the way I thought about what my career could be sort of changed. So, I wanted to, I didn't want to let anyone down. So I went out to Los Angeles working as hard as I possibly could. I mean, really in the practice room in a real way, more than I ever had been. And toward the end of my time there, Judy, my teacher, convinced me that this could be a reality for me, that a performance career could be something that I could do if I wanted to. And I think, that in itself speaks to, again, the importance of access, the importance of gender equity, specifically in classical music, and the impact that a teacher could have. I independently and solely credit Judy with my career as a performer. I don't know if I could have done that without that affirmation. So from USC, I auditioned and won a fellowship with the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, a 2-year fellowship. At the beginning of the second year of that fellowship, I won a permanent position with the Knoxville Symphony Orchestra. I played as their second bassoonist for 5 seasons. Along the lines, I got into radio. A position opened up at the local public radio station. I thought it would be, a cool way to make a little extra money and to spread my knowledge. So I went out for that and got it. And along the way, during my time in this dual life as an orchestral bassoonist and a radio host, I realized that I had the opportunity to speak to people and have a platform that was so much bigger than just playing second bassoon. Not that that isn't an important, a very important and integral job, but I saw my purpose and what I had been, the opportunity I had been given as bigger. So I took my job on the radio in Knoxville and focused on racial equity and diversity in classical music. I spoke on many panels. I created a number of series that got the attention of folks at American Public Media. So on a trip to the Twin Cities, when I had just happened to be subbing with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra, the folks found out that I was here, reached out to me. We had lunch. That was in December of 2017. 3 months later, I was invited to apply for a job, and 3 months after that, I packed a U-Haul and moved here to Minnesota. So since then, since moving here to Minnesota, I've played a big role in the programming that we put out for our local and national audiences. I'm really happy to be able to say that an hour of programming at American Public Media on my service specifically does not go by without music by a composer of color, a woman composer, or a composer who's alive. I think that's also very important. So I've played a huge role in programming in that regard. And along the lines, again, I started a podcast called Triloquy that breaks down some conversations, presents classical music in a laid back way that is without code switching, in which myself, my co-hosts, and my guests can speak freely about our experiences and about our opinions. So yeah, in closing of my little introduction, thanks again for inviting me, and thank you, Judy, who's watching.
Thank you, Garrett. Lots of things to follow up from both of you already, but let's move to Sean, and we'll come back to some of those topics. Sean.
Well, similarly, I like my trajectory starts in grade school. It starts in junior high with a really great band director. I was really lucky. I'm from Miami, and band is really big. You know, it's a football state. Band is really big there. So I just was lucky enough to have a really great, inspiring junior high band director. And he's the one who first put the bassoon in my hand, only because I actually wanted to play oboe, and only gave me the bassoon because my hands were too big for the oboe, he said. So, but from there, I was lucky that there's a lot of just being at the right place, the right time. There was a art school, magnet school in Miami called New World School of the Arts. And at the time, the dean of the school was John Delancey, the former principal oboe of Philadelphia Orchestra and dean of Curtis. They convinced him to start a little art school in Miami. So he brought all of his buddies down. So he had, former principal bassoon of New York Philharmonic was also teaching there, Manny Ziegler. So I got to, work with him and do chamber music with Delancey, and it was just really inspiring. And that's where I decided that I wanted to be a professional musician. At the time, my goal was probably that standard goal. I want to be principal bassoon in a major orchestra, and so I did all the steps. I went to conservatory. I went, went to Juilliard, studied with Frank Morelli, and went to Rice for grad school, studied with Kamens. And then I did, like Garrett, I did the Detroit Symphony Fellowship program for 2 years, and then one position with Colorado Symphony on contrabassoon. And so I, for a while, my trajectory seemed pretty clear, but as it evolved, as my kind of life evolved, the opportunities evolved as well. And I ended up moving to the Bay Area, San Francisco, and started freelancing, and just a lot of really great opportunities opened up for me when I got here. Got a chance to, sub a lot with, San Francisco Symphony, and so, had a few, 1-year positions with San Francisco Ballet and with San Francisco Opera, and got the wonderful opportunity to sit next to Rufus Olivier, who's just one of inspiring players and people that I've, gotten a chance to meet on the bassoon. And so, so my life kind of evolved more into, this kind of broad freelancer life. When I did my taxes, I did like 15 W-2s. So there's a lot of components that make up the life, and I play in a wind quintet, that, Kika mentioned, called Quinteto Latino, where the mission of the group is to advocate for and perform the music of Latinx composers. We solely play the music of Latinx composers, and I really, love the mission of the group. Armando Castellano started this group. and it's been a powerful journey. Also getting a chance to teach with teach at this program called Young Musicians Choral Orchestra. It's a program for low income students that they get free instruments and private lessons and ensembles, and it's really great to be a part of something like that and kind of be able to kind of mentor the next generation. And so so that's kind of that's been the trajectory of my life so far.
Thank you, Sean, very much. Before I move on with a couple of questions I have as follow-ups, I want to remind our audience that you could also participate with questions. We have in the bottom right side a Q&A area where you can click and enter your questions. We will be happy to follow through. And at the end, also leave some time for other questions you may have. So Kika, Kristen, when she was introducing the panel today, talked about intersectionality. And we know that being a musician of color brings a certain aspects, out, right? But you're a woman too. So can you talk about your experience of that intersectionality, being a person from Honduras and being a woman and being a Bassoonist of color?
Well, I would say there's a lot of challenges, but also there's a lot of incredibly joyful parts of being a person of color in the arts. One of them is before this panel, somebody was like, oh, do you know Garrett and Sean? And I was like, yes, I know Garrett and Sean because of the network of Black musicians around the country, and everybody is so cool anyway. But yeah, so there's that. I feel a lot of solidarity with other Black and brown musicians. But then sometimes it is frustrating, people, in my professional life will say things that they just wouldn't say to somebody who didn't look like me. And then I have, and then I'm and then I have to decide is this worth losing all of the rest of the revenue that I could get from this thing, from speaking out against something someone is. And then also I know definitely from the time I started playing the bassoon, actually I started on the clarinet, and I had a clarinet teacher who was like, your lips are too big to play the clarinet. You're going to really struggle playing the clarinet. I don't know what to do about your face. I've never had a student who had lips like yours. And I don't know what her intentions were, but the message that I got was, I don't fit this instrument. I'm never going to have success. I'm a 12-year-old girl. My brain is not totally developed. And the message I'm getting from someone who I look up to, who I admire, and is teaching me is that my body is not right. And so then I was like, maybe clarinet isn't going to work for me. Maybe I suck at clarinet. Maybe I didn't suck at clarinet, and maybe somebody convinced me that I did. But it turned out she happened to have a bassoon in her house one day, and I was like, Mamma mia, look at that. That is awesome because it's so big. And then I switched to bassoon, and I would say from then on I had, Garrett was saying, my band director, he probably the band director that I had in high school, supported me and just gave me unqualified I don't know, help and support. And it was never oh, you could be a pretty good bassoon player, unfortunately you're a brown woman. He was just you got the goods, good luck, kid. And then go just the rest of my life. I mean, we could have a whole other meeting about all of the mean, racist, sexist things that people have said to me in my life. But I would say definitely that's something to consider, when you're working with someone who doesn't necessarily look like you don't know what they had to do to get into the same room as you. And so maybe anytime you say something, take 5 minutes, not 5 minutes, maybe 5 seconds, and think about if I say this, who does this help and who does this hurt? One time at a board meeting, somebody called me sassy, and I was I didn't love that. And so it's just, I mean, I could go on forever, but yeah, I would say being a woman, it's all of the obvious women things. People are surprised. And also I'm not a super thin hourglass shaped woman. And so also being a slightly bigger lady causes people to assume things about me. And being brown, like people also, they're like, does she speak English? You know, what is her deal? So it's definitely like, those are all little issues that like they do build up, but like if you have a good support system, like all of these incredible Black musicians and brown musicians all around the country who are all like, I can feel them like rooting for me and I'm rooting for them. So like, I would say it's like 50-50, like happy and like kind of a bummer.
Thank you, Kika, for the candid answer to all of those issues that all of we have experienced in different situations. And I imagine many of our audience and listeners and viewers here have identified with that, over and over again. So thank you for that. Maybe that leads me to the next question for the panel, and it's what are some barriers that you have had to surpass? Kika spoke on that already, but Sean and Garrett, would you like to share something in that regard, specific barriers you have had in your musical careers?
I think Kika said something very, very, very important when she talked about hearing certain comments and deciding whether or not saying something back, is worth losing that job, losing that gig, losing that network connection. I think that is a barrier that many of us share. Certainly one that I've experienced. This idea that under this umbrella of so-called classical music, there's a sense of ownership that does not involve us. So that cultural that cultural how can I say, friction has always been there for me, and I think it's still there from my perspective. I think visibility is so important. That woman who told Kika that she couldn't play the clarinet, maybe had not seen a woman who looks like Kika playing the clarinet. I think we have to talk about visibility. I think we have to talk about, as I was saying in my introduction, access. How can broadening the access diversify and make the face of this whole thing look more colorful? But on the on the concrete side of things, I feel like my challenge for many years was money. If I can be frank, I didn't have that. I didn't have the financial support from my family in the way that they were able to. So things like summer festivals were out of the question for me. I had to work in the summer. I went to my first summer festival after I had been working professionally for a year. The conversation that we all know of saving up and finally buying that bassoon, something that definitely played a big role in my development as a musician, having this instrument that I could bring into professional auditions, into on the professional stage. So I think as we think about how to solve these issues, again, visibility and figuring out ways that we can broaden that access so that those support systems can start earlier and grow stronger through the development of a musician's career.
And I think you're talking of something systemic, right? How that access comes from other entities and organizations and institutions that are conscious of those barriers and provide the mechanisms and the money and the investment and the ideas to broaden access. Thank you for that, Garrett. Sean, you want to add?
Well, and just kind of adding to what both you guys have been saying, things to expand access is really important. And also allowing people to see the representation, I think is powerful and inspiring. I think some of my limitations might have had to do with not seeing the external representation, and then feeling like being the only Black person in the room all the time. Start feeling like, well, do I fit in? Do I belong here? And so that internal dialogue that can be very limiting, and I think that it's been a kind of limiting factor for me at times.
And it's interesting because, to be the Black person in the room or the Hispanic woman, bassoonist, or whatever it is role, can be we can't be the speakers for everybody, right? We can only speak of our own experiences. Yeah. And we are multitudes, we come here with many identities, we try to unify them and have a panel like this and try to share our experiences. But I just want to make sure everybody knows we're coming from very, very different places, and we're speaking on our behalf and hoping to bridge some of our experiences with others as well. Garrett, you made me think when you were talking about your radio show about this thing that I think is common for the four of us, and is advocacy. We come to this profession, and bassoon perhaps has been the way we got where we got. Music was that kind of a path we decided. But at some point, I felt, and I know all of you did as well, that responsibility to also have a voice and to advocate and to open spaces and to be mentors, because we already spoke of how important mentorship has been in our lives and your lives. So Garrett, starting with you, and we can go around with this question. How do you balance that between your musical career and advocacy? And besides, what else have you been doing to use every, path you have, every tool you have in your hands to advocate?
Yeah, absolutely. When I spoke to visibility earlier, I think it's important to note that counts for repertoire as well. I think it's a shame. And Leah, you spoke to systemic issues. When we go through these music classes in high school, even in college, there are people with degrees who have never heard the name Carlos Chavez, Leo Brower, William Grant Still, for goodness sake. So understanding that reality is why I made the very difficult, but what I felt was the very important decision to make my musicianship secondary. So when I think about the oral definition that people have for so-called classical music, obviously it's predominantly what comes from Western Europe, sometimes here in America, forgetting that there are traditions that ran parallel that are equally classical, and traditions that are much, much, much older than the traditional canon that are equally classical. So, I see my role again as someone in media to create that visibility in more ways than one. So I definitely do still play. Folks invite me, actually, folks invite me to play contrabassoon more these days than anything. As an aside, Sean can speak to the fact that if you sound decent on contrabassoon at one gig, people just think you're the contrabassoonist. But yeah, so for that reason, I think it's a very big responsibility that I have to create that level of visibility for more people, with one of the with one of the final goals being for a person, a kid, beginning this journey, opening that bassoon case or that oboe case for the first time, and understanding that so-called classical music is something that does involve them, and that they can see themselves in. I love playing the bassoon. The Leger reeds have been a lifesaver for me, because I don't have so much time to scrape these days. I still do play, but bassoon has definitely taken a secondary role in light of the urgency that I see in classical music, and the diversification and the equity we need to see in classical music.
Thank you, Garrett. Kik and Sean, would you like to speak on advocacy?
Well, I would just say, I was thinking about this when I got the emails and what we were all going to talk about. I will preface that my dad sings in a professional choir, so I was not totally uninitiated to classical music, and I took piano lessons when I was a little kid. But when you were a little kid, you do not draw the line between classical music and you playing whatever on the with 4 fingers on the piano. But I remember very vividly, I was probably 12-ish, and I think I had either was about to start playing the bassoon or had just started playing the bassoon, and I was homesick. And my mom in the spring does a thing where she makes potato leek soup and listens to Rite of Spring. And so I was home while she was making her soup, and I was lying on the couch, and I was like, boy, I don't feel good. And then I was listening to, she was like, I'm gonna turn on some music. I was like, whatever. And when she played Rite of Spring, I was like, what am I hearing? What is happening to me? What is happening to my heart? So I definitely think yeah, it is about advocacy, is about exposure, because I was not like, oh yes, the bassoon is the call of the wild, and the, you know, I was just like the 12-year-old with no like classical training, and I heard something that is like, you know, is like a little bit out there, and I was like, this is the thing for me. So I feel like, yeah, it's definitely, if you expose kids like equally to the art of classical music and like, or orchestral music, or just like bassoon music, some kids will like it, some kids won't like it, some kids will like really hate it, but I feel like everybody should have the opportunity to decide whether or not they like it, you know. And I would say since 2015, I have only taught in schools that were like Black and Latino schools. I think I've had one white student since 2015, and that is a deliberate choice. And I don't know, there's like some proverb that says, if not me, who? And I feel like I feel like it would have been really cool for me to have a Black brown bassoon teacher when I was 13 years old. I feel like that would have changed my life. And so I feel like what I can do for this next generation of musicians is take a train an hour to the Bronx and teach bassoon and oboe to these kids who like really deserve to have, like, I don't mean to toot my own horn, but like a teacher like me. So
Absolutely. I totally relate to that. If not me, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
also actually brings a lot of tension and pressure
Yeah.
and sadness and many other feelings to our lives.
Yeah.
Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I definitely did. I don't think I saw a Black classical musician through grade school. I mean, when I got into college, I found out that Rufus Olivier existed, you know, principal bassoon in San Francisco Opera and San Francisco Ballet, and actually a friend of mine, as a birthday gift, secretly contacted him and had him call me on my birthday to give me a inspirational pep talk, and that was really, it was really important moment. And when I finally actually got a chance to play with him, you know, decades later, he was like, "You're that guy," you know. But it's really important. It's really important, and so I try to do that. I mean, my quintet does lots of outreach and into the schools, going into schools. You know, we probably mostly do that now, and it's seeing, you know, going into schools and, you know, seeing Black and brown faces playing this music, and knowing that, wow, you know, not only does that music exist, but you know, people like me do it, can do it. It's not just old white people's music, you know, and that, you know, there are composers that exist that are not just old white people. So I think that's really important.
Thank you so much for speaking on behalf of that. I think all of us attended, and many of our attendees today attended that panel that happened last week with the Young Concerts. It was amazing. And at the end, the closing reflection was about what I think the question was, what can white institutions do to help the rest of us? And the comment was, it's not that the white institutions need to come to us to teach us and tell us how to do things better. It's how much they're missing by not having access to our music and our composers and the richness of our cultures. So on that same line, we have some questions about how to be an ally. I wonder if you want to help with that. Our friends, what do you think is the best way to support this movement of equality, inclusion, diversity in our world?
That's a question that I get a lot in the work I do. You know, how to be an ally, what's the best way to be an ally? My answer to that, has evolved and seems to change all the time. But, right now in this moment, I'm thinking, so much about education and those entry points. So let's think for a second. When we begin, when we major in bassoon or music or whatever, think about the composers that we learn about. Think about the music that is used for us to learn music theory, how the music that is used for us to learn tuning. All of that comes from very few sources. So, for me, allyship is going back and doing the retroactive work about learning about cultures that you don't know about, as it applies to us as bassoonists. The next time you have a recital, do you have a piece of music by a woman composer on that program? Do you have a piece of music by a Black composer on that program? Again, that visibility is so important. You never know who's in the audience, you never know who's watching, and you never know who might see or hear themselves in a performance or in advocacy of a piece of music that represents something outside of that traditional canon. So and obviously that's just the start. I think that's the second part of my answer. The way to be a good ally is to realize that is just the start. But it's a start that I'm sad to say that so much of the so-called classical music industry has not yet met. We really need to take a step back and learn about what we did not learn about. We need to understand how the systemic issues of education play into our careers and what we need to do to break outside of that.
Thank you. Kik and Sean.
Oh, Sean, is it my turn? Well, I will say, like I said before, this is like my mantra in my life is the next thing I say, who is it gonna hurt and who is it gonna help? Like, is this friendly behavior? Is this unfriendly behavior? And like, I go on the internet, I look on Twitter, I look on my own Facebook feed, and I see the same thing over and over. And it is amplify the voices of Black people. Like Garrett said, try to learn a little bit about something that you don't know before. Admit when you are not right and apologize and move on. And like, it's just, I would say, like, I think a lot of people, this is something else I have been thinking about lately. Like, everybody thinks they're a good person. Like, I think I'm a good person because I sort my recycling and I like don't make a lot of noise in my apartment during business hours and like whatever. But that's just how I feel in my heart. But to everybody else, like, you are judged by like the things that you do. And so like I think nobody thinks that the thing that they're gonna say is racist because they can't be racist because they're a nice person. But like I think everybody is just like a good example is like asking somebody, oh, what are you? Or where are you from? Or what are you? Especially in these trying times, I'm sure as a fellow Latina, if you're not like thrilled to have people ask you where you're from or what your deal is, like, and it also like saying like, what are you is not something that a friend would say. Like that is something that as your friendship progresses, I might say, oh, and also I'm Honduran, and be like, oh, that is very cool to know. Like, oh, I'm Afro-Latina, and they're like, that is also really cool to know. But like in meeting someone in the first like 2 seconds, if they're like, what are you? Then I'm like, as my friend Richard would say, like, you're not a safe person. You're like I don't know what you want. I don't know what you want. So I would just say, like, do a lot of listening, do a lot of reading, read something that makes you feel uncomfortable and like sit with it for a while and like try to understand like what, because everybody thinks that I'm like super perfect, but I spend a lot of time reading and trying to understand like people whose views are different from mine. Like when sometimes you'll read people will say like classical music is too racist, there's nothing that we can do, we need to tear it all down. And so my immediate reaction is like, I do not think that is a good idea. But it is, it's worth it for me to try to understand where they're coming from, and maybe that will help my opinions evolve, and maybe that will help me find a solution that will benefit all of us. So I would say who are you helping? Who are you hurting? Do a lot of reading, do a lot of listening, and don't say anything racist if you can help it. That's my advice.
Thank you for that. Kika, you reminded me of an interview of James Baldwin that I was listening to last week on Fresh Air, in which he was speaking of that people get lost in the labels and forget trying to figure out what you are as opposed to who you are.
Yeah,
so
it would be nice if people were just like, that's my friend Kika who plays a bassoon, instead of like, where is she from? Where did she go to school? Who are her teachers? What makes her like a valuable person? I'm a valuable person because I'm like a living human. Like, and so we just have to like kind of, think about like, you know, the hierarchy in your mind, like why you like some people better, why you think some people are more valuable, and just try to like not think like that anymore.
And all of our biases as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Yes. Sean, your turn. You're muted.
I want to agree with Garrett and say that I think one thing you can do is do the work to diversify your repertoire that you perform. It's so important. You know, that's, like I said, you never know who's going to be in that audience and discover some, wow, that, you know, the people like me that, you know, that are prominent composers. Wow, that's a really cool piece. Or even people who are not, just knowing that there's some great repertoire. I mean, playing with Quinteto Latino, one of the main things that it taught was the obvious thing. It's like, wow, there's all this repertoire that is amazing that never gets played. For some reason, we play all this, there's all this absurd, silly woodwind repertoire out there that gets played, you know, kind of trashy stuff that, you know, gets played all the time. But there's great repertoire by Latin American composers that never gets touched. Teachers don't even know about. They haven't done the work to explore. I mean, remember talking to one teacher, and they just kind of assumed that because they didn't know it, it wasn't any good, you know, or they, you know, kind of had an image in their head of something very, you know, trite and stereotypical. And it's like, no, there's some, you know, Chavez, there's some really heavy duty composers out there that need to get, you know, need to see the light of day, and people will love them if they know they exist.
Right, and many more to come, right? And it's a world to be discovered. There have been some questions about repertoire, so I'm going to volunteer the four of us as good people to contact and ask questions about repertoire. There are many compendiums of pieces already out. You can find them on Facebook and social media. You can Google, but you can also come to me anytime for Latin American music, for bassoon, for Kika as well, Sean as well, Garrett. So I'm volunteering all of us for that, to answer those questions about repertoire. And also the next summer session, Mick Quigley, is going to be about repertoire by underrepresented composers. So that will be a follow-up to those of you wondering about where to find those pieces. I have a question for you, and it is, in a world, without limitations, what do you dream about for your professional life? And let me expand that also. What do you dream about for your communities, the communities you represent?
For me, my biggest limitation is time, and that's something that can't really be changed. You know, for folks who don't know, my live radio host, my live radio show, I host overnight. So this is kind of the middle of the night for me, and I have to, you know, traverse all of the other projects that I engage in that way. So you know, with that aside, in a limitless world where resources and money were no problem, I would love for there to be avenues for more of this underrepresented music to be recorded. the album by Quinteto Latino that I don't know if there's more than one. I'm familiar with one. I put it on the radio all the time. Just exposing people to this new music. What if we had ways of more of this music just being more ubiquitous in that listening experience? I think it's very important to note that for the vast majority of people, their access to classical music, so-called classical music, is over the radio, more with streaming these days. So, in a limitless world, I would really focus on creating that large vehicle for pushing classical music out to people, to be a vehicle in which these some of these conversations begin to diminish. The question of repertoire. Well, being able to hear that repertoire on a regular basis. The challenge that I see in that regard these days is just getting things recorded. I'm sure there are many folks watching this who can speak to the financial and other challenges of recording and put together an album. But until then, it's important for us to really identify our fellow musicians who are trying to engage those projects, support them in the ways you can, financially and otherwise, to make these ideas more of a reality. Back to that question of how to be an ally. Find every week, every other week, find a musician to support, because I can tell you personally, there are thousands and thousands of musicians with really great performances and great music that they want to share, but they just don't necessarily have the means of sharing it. In my limitless world, that problem will go away.
Thank you, Garrett. Sean?
Yeah. In a world without limitations, I'd be only doing projects that excite my passion. Doing more projects like that, that are inspiring, and luckily my quintet, we get to do a lot of do commissioning, and if we had, without limitations, we'd have more money to do more commissioning of some really great composers. Of a Gabriella Frank piece coming down the pike that I'm pretty excited about. So yeah, I guess money tends to be a big limitation for a lot of those kinds of things. Money and the time to be able to put the projects together. All the worthy projects that need to be done.
Thank you, Sean. Kika?
Yeah, like everybody's talking about money, and money is like, nobody wants to talk about it, but it is like a huge barrier to everything that we're trying to do. So in my professional, like in my own personal and professional life, what I would love to do is play in my super awesome chamber groups. And I would also like to like get a job at like one of these big philanthropy funds, and then be in charge of who gets what money, like, and be or maybe start my own grant making organization, or like become a venture capitalist. I don't know, but like what frustrates me is when it comes to like all of the stuff that I do is like basically funded through grants and charity. And you'll see, and I mean, pick any city in the country, like the big charity, like the big grant making organization will give $2 million to the big orchestra in the city. And then there will be littler groups like Quinteto Latino or like incidental chamber players where like they're like, oh, sorry, we gave $1 million to whatever symphony, we don't have any money left for you. But like, if you give us $1,500, that is like one incredible concert that we can put on for a community. Like, everybody's thinking about in these really big money terms where $5,000, $2,500 to like a smaller group who's more agile and who's like listening better to their communities, like will be a transformative amount of money. So like, I always think about that in terms of like, wouldn't it be cool? Like, I know some people who are making these decisions, and I think they are making really good decisions. And then some other organizations, like, I'm like, I don't know what you're doing. But so it's definitely like, yeah, if I could do whatever I wanted, it would be to like be in charge of a big grant making organization and then help groups that are, I think, actually, you know, and it's also all like subjective. The things that Kika thinks are very important, which are diversity and access and equity. Yeah, so that is my dream.
They are very important. And also you're touching on something really, really interesting, which is the lack of representation in leadership, right? So who sits in those boards and those organizations that make decisions, or where the money goes and the amount of money and what projects are vetted and accepted. So it is important also to question and to, you know, infiltrate leadership of organizations and be present there as well, to be able to represent our people. Let's see, I'm looking at the questions and see what else do I have here asked. I think we have answered most of the questions that have appeared in the Q&A.
Yeah, I saw my very first bassoon teacher, Megan, made a comment. Hi, Megan, I love you. I miss you so much. That's so nice. Hey, Megan.
If I can just throw something in as you're skimming through the questions, we're talking about leadership and seeing more diversity in those decision-making positions. You know, that is the step that I think has yet to actually be explored. So there are so many initiatives that bring music out into communities of color and other marginalized communities. We're beginning to see more and more folks of color, you know, in these band rooms and in these college programs. But that's not actually where the change is going to work. You know, I come from Memphis, where, you know, the city itself is a predominantly Black city. So, you know, in my early days, I was never the only one in the room. My first teacher was Black. My second teacher was a woman. So, you know, it's not the diversity on the ground level that really altered my trajectory, but it was the folks who were able to make those decisions. In my case, you know, my teachers, as it applies to my bassoon career. But I think it's very important to always ask that question when you come across an organization that wants to do some philanthropic work. You know, my question is always, well, what does your board look like? Well, who's managing? We have to get beyond diversity on the ground level. We have to see people of color and women from the bottom all the way up to the top.
Thank you for that. Absolutely. There are some questions about how to confront our colleagues when we make a call for diversity in repertoire and we get faced with a no, or with all of these questions about excellence, or, you know, adversity in general. They don't want to embrace the new repertoire. Any advice for people, many of us that face that on a regular basis?
I can speak to that. So, you know, the structure of public radio is contribution. So there's always the concern of, and I guess this could apply to orchestras as well. You know, is what we're putting out there going to generate the revenue? I think that's a question that can always, you know, be explored in many ways. The way I think about it is, what audience do you have in mind when you have questions about so-called quality and so-called excellence? Who are the people that you're thinking about? And I can almost guarantee that 9 times out of 10, it's folks who have always been centered and represented in decisions like that. I think with courage and with bravery, more diverse music can go out, can be put out there, and in return, you know, the audience is diversified. Now, what's more uncomfortable for more people is addressing what I see as the root of that issue. When you question the excellence of something or the quality of something because of who wrote it or where it comes from, what do we call that? You know, that's that R word no one likes to throw around. I think if I don't know. And again, as Kika said in her introduction, you know, that challenge of speaking out and sacrificing your job or your livelihood, it's uncomfortable, but it's necessary. I would always remember that, you know, that level of discomfort, you know, and having that conversation is the discomfort that most musicians of color have every time they go to a rehearsal, every time they go into the concert hall. So we have to uncenter the folks we always have. And I think it's really very important for non-people of color who want to be allies to step outside of that comfort zone. Change doesn't come from comfort. Change comes from challenge and friction.
Thank you for that. And I think it's important, especially these days, to remember that those uncomfortable conversations are the ones that are going to create the change. Things, if they remain stable and balanced for everybody, and we're all smiley and happy and still playing the same repertoire, nothing is going to change. So this is the time to question those structures and to shake the ground with new ideas and old ideas. Yes. Kika, you wanted to add something?
Oh, I guess just like it's always important, as my mom always told me, to speak the truth with love. And I know that there are, like, what I would do in my own life and the groups that I have worked with is like try to get another person, like try to convince like at least one other person in your group. Like say you're on a board and you're trying to convince them to like program, I don't know, like have like, Latino Heritage Month or something. Like make your pitch to like one person and get them good and convinced, and then go into the meeting and be like, I have this great idea. And then your person can be like, I think that's a great idea. So I think like it is hard. Definitely, like a lot of times, anytime I am anywhere, I'm the only person that looks like me there. And I know like there are a lot of times that I would have loved to have somebody else like back me up. And so now I feel like, I don't know the best way to say it. I don't have as much to lose now, financially, as I would have like 10 or even 5 years ago. So I feel more empowered to say something when I feel like things are going wrong. But like, and I would charge other people who would like have like a 10-year job, if they have if they have a friend who's like, I feel like we don't need to be playing like handle like all the time. And then the other person was like, yeah, I agree. Like go in together, like, unity, allyship. So that would be my advice.
Use your platforms, right?
Yeah.
A couple of questions that I heard in a workshop I attended last week. It was directed to white people, how to be an ally. And it was the first one, what are you afraid of? And the second one was, what are you willing to risk? And I think it's a good question for all of us as we enter this world and help each other, especially for those that are in positions of power and have wider platforms, and especially for white people that want to be allies, use that power and help out. I think we're running out of time, but before we go, I want to ask you all, where can we find you? Where can everybody find you and connect with you? What are those places, web pages, social media handles, and such?
Well, my website, I don't like update it that much, but it's kikawright.com, and like my email address and everything is on there. And also if you look up Kika Wright, I think I'm like the only Kika Wright around. So if it's KIKAWRIGHT. So
thank you, Kika. Sean?
I don't have my own website. What's wrong?
What? Oh my God, Sean, get a website.
Well, I have my Quintet's website, Quintet's Latino. You can find me there, and Facebook.
Yeah, so my one-stop shop, you can just visit my website, GarrettMcQueen.com. I host Music Through the Night, Wednesday through Saturdays from midnight to 6 a.m. Central Time. I simulcast to 300 different networks. So I am in most cities. I'm not in LA, Chicago, or New York City, but you can always stream me at yourclassical.org/radio. My podcast, Triloquy, comes out every Thursday. You can find that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts, and also at triloquy.org. And again, if all of that information you can find at my website, just type my name, GarrettMcQueen.com.
Thank you, Garrett, and thank you so much to the three of you for being here with us today. This is a series that will continue. There's so many questions that we didn't have the time to answer, but this is a dialogue and a conversation that has just started. So please stay tuned to Make Quigley. and to any other initiative for the same matter. We need to continue seeing each other in those workshops and conversations and continue adding to that conversation, all of us, panelists and attendees as well. Thank you, McQuigley. Hope to see you next week in the next one. And thank you, Forest Music, for sponsoring this event today. And thank you all.
Yep.
Stay well. And
Thank you,
we'll
Leah.
see
Thank
soon.
you.
Thank you.